Hey, what's happening, guys? Dan Darrow here with another Options to Play video update. So, without further ado, all right, the first earnings on the radar video of fourth quarter earnings here. I'm not going to rattle on because there's just so much to get to. It's going to be a jam-packed video, so try to keep up with me here, all right? So, Monday before the open, after the close. Actually, there's not a single company scheduled. It's actually kind of surprising. Um, just because it's a pretty packed week, and not to have anything scheduled Monday either before the open or after the close, a little surprising. But regardless, Tuesday before the open, things really get going. All right, so I'm gonna lump these banks together, but before the open, you have Citi, JP, Wells, and Goldman Sachs. All right. So like I said, I'm kind of lumping the banks together. Um, I'll say Goldman Sachs is the laggard, okay, and probably going to be the most volatile, or maybe the most volatile. They're pricing in about 8 points. Um, so I think the XLF, or if you're looking for like one of those bullish triple ETFs, the FAS, the FAS, I just feel like because you have basically every single major bank reporting next week, the XLF might be the best way to approach them. Um, but if I had to single out one, maybe I'd go with Goldman Sachs just because it has been lagging. 8 points, not cheap, but because it has been lagging pretty sharply, maybe there could be some catch up if the numbers are good. Expectations are kind of, maybe not great for the banks this quarter, but if they surprise to the upside, Goldman Sachs, right, could have room back to 220 just to play catch up because it's lagging some of the other names. Pricing in 8 points. So I'd say cautiously bullish is my tone on the banks. Cautiously being like the key word there. And anything on like Goldman Sachs would probably be speculative though. All right. Sherman Williams, not Sherman Williams, Charles Schwab. I get the tickers mixed up. So Charles Schwab, $1.75 is what they're looking for. To be honest, I probably wouldn't normally be looking at Schwab. I don't really trade it on earnings very often. It's not really like a historically a volatile name. But after like this whole $0 commission headlines that have come out in the last like couple weeks, I feel like this group might have elevated volatility. E-Trade reports later in the week too, so you have like a couple headlines. So you have Schwab and E-Trade. I mean, I guess you could even possibly look at like TD Ameritrade as well, right, or Interactive Brokers. $1.75, definitely a little bit higher for Schwab, just if it was like a normal report. But recent news might make this a little bit bigger mover this quarter, so definitely something to keep an eye on. Johnson Johnson, so it's gonna be a big healthcare print. 3.5 points, which was expected. Um, I can't help shaking like the bearish notion on this one. To me, it seems like it's set up for just like a move lower, but it did beat and raise last quarter, so numbers were okay last quarter. Like I guess what my opinion is shaped by is the fact that it's below kind of like some key resistance, right? Well off the high. It's had a bunch of material material adverse rulings go against it. So a few big lawsuits. So it just seems like there's like multiple big headlines against it. Technically, it looks kind of susceptible. And actually, the last 2 quarters, even though like it had decent numbers and it rallied early, it actually got sold into very fast. So it seems like it's kind of like lost momentum. Could be susceptible for a technical breakdown. So I might look at like a bearish trade on that one. UNH, another big healthcare name. 9.5 points is what they're expecting on this. I feel like this is one of the more interesting setups of the week. Option pricing isn't too bad. Technical setup looks pretty good. Stock is right at critical support, critical yearly support. You can see what I mean if I scroll out. So it does have a history of moving pretty consistently, and it's right at critical technical levels. So to me, it seems like it has room in either direction. So I kind of like the idea of a volatility strategy on that one. All right, after the close Tuesday, there's really only like one name, UAL. So 475 is what they're looking for. You can see it's been in like a range for about the last year. I really don't know what to make of the airlines. Last quarter was solid, but then Delta just kicked off like the airline reports with kind of weak numbers. So UAL stuck in a range. Delta wasn't particularly great. UAL had a more muted move last quarter, so 475. Options seem a little bit more expensive. So even though it's kind of a bigger name, don't really like the setup, so it's probably just going to be an avoid for me. Wednesday before the open, so Bank of America, another big bank, $1.10 is what's priced in. So it's probably going to react to the bank numbers on Tuesday because you have Citi, JP, Wells all on Tuesday morning. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a big move left in the tank on this when they actually report. Because if it does have a big reaction to those, it might not have a big reaction to its own numbers. So again, thinking XLF or maybe even like Goldman Sachs options might be the way to go for the bank names next week. Excuse me, ASML. So another big name Wednesday before the open. So you can see the charts obviously have been running and running and running. Today up like another like $10. 12.5 points is what's priced in for earnings next week, and it's actually one of two big chip reports next week. Taiwan 7 the other, which I'll get to in a second. So this has definitely been a leader, and it's up a lot since last quarter. Just broke out, looks fantastic, but the more it's run and like the more steep the slope has gotten, that just means expectations are higher. And I guess like the problem is like I haven't really had like a great feel for the chip stocks because it seems like they kind of run, have bad numbers, and they kind of like sell off. So I guess my gut says avoid this, but you could possibly look at like LAM, LRCX, or AMAT because those two names will. They don't always have like a big move off the LAM number or off the ASML number, but they have on occasion responded. So might be worth a look for a sympathy trade. So either LAM or AMAT. After the close Wednesday, so Alcoa, for those of you that have been around for a while, it used to be like the official, well, the unofficial kickoff to earnings season, but it really hasn't been relevant for a while. So probably not worth really anything worth doing on that one. CSX, so about 360 or so is what's priced in here. Had a really surprising miss last quarter, surprisingly bad. Thing got absolutely rocked and dragged down the rails with it. Stock hasn't recovered any ground, and it's just above its August low. I certainly wouldn't be expecting a move of July's magnitude this time around, but options to me seem to leave a little room. Especially when you factor in you have two more rail reports next week as well, so UMP and KSU. Last quarter we played NSC as a sympathy trade for like the sector, so like CSX and UMP prints. And honestly, NSC could be another good week to try sympathy trade on that, but this time maybe like both ways because like last time it got absolutely demolished. So it could be one of those sympathy trade candidates, NSC next week because you have CSX and UMP. All right. After close Wednesday, also IBM. So a couple tech names we'll talk about here. So IBM, 7.5 points was priced in. Had a really nice move off its actual earnings in July, and it gave it all back in August. So I feel like most people still place IBM in the prove it camp. They'll only buy it if the numbers are actually good. So it doesn't get the benefit of the doubt anymore. But the chart's really at the top of like this yearly downtrend, and it seems like if it's good and it really starts to break out, there could be a pretty significant pent-up move coming. So I personally still kind of like the bullish thesis. Feel like the upside scenario could be pretty significant if it can like put together a good number and then set up like that like multi-year downtrend breakout. Netflix. So this is probably the main event, or at least what most people are going to be talking about next week, right? 30 points is what's expected, or give or take. Last quarter was just a very bad miss, and things have really just only gotten worse since then. So you have bad miss last quarter, competition's heating up. This is going to be as critical of a quarter for Netflix as it's had in like recent memory. I'm a little bit less confident in this setup. Last quarter I thought it was a very good setup. This quarter, not so much. I feel like the competition concerns aren't going away. So even if the numbers are good, you still have like those concerns like coming up with Disney and then Apple TV, right? So I feel like the upside might be more muted. Whereas if the numbers are bad, then that's going to be 2 quarters in a row with competition concerns. So it could be even more ugly on the downside. So I feel like I lean slightly more bearish, but the options are on the higher end, just based off like the average move on this one. So I feel like kind of need to like pick a direction. So if I did do anything, it might be actually to the downside, even though it's gotten hit so hard from last quarter, just because I feel like the risk reward sets up for more of like a downside trade on Netflix. All right, URI also Wednesday after the close. So this is going to be a big industrial report. They're pricing in about 9.5 in that ballpark. They took down the higher end of guidance last quarter here, and it got hit pretty hard. But what you can see is that the stock has really been in like a long range, like a tightening long range too. So to me, like URI is interesting because it's kind of like a gauge for like the machinery names, so like Cat and Deere. It moved 10 last quarter, moved 13 the quarter before that. So it does tend to move pretty well. What I'm interested in is if it can get up through like the low 130s, so like 10 points higher, or if it gets down through like 105, so like 10 to 15 points lower, it could be like a real significant pent up range breakout or breakdown. So I kind of like where it's set up in terms of like a technical trade, and I like the fact that it's like one of the first big industrial names. So I like this one kind of as a candidate possibly for like a volatility strategy. Okay, Thursday before the open, Honeywell, 6 points. That's what's priced in. Another big industrial report. So URI is first, but Honeywell probably more important just because it's a bigger name, big multinational. Stock really isn't acting great, hanging right around the 200A. You can see here. It's not typically a huge mover, and options are definitely more on the expensive side. So I'm probably going to leave it alone. But it could have a big impact on some other names. So I'll keep an eye on it. But as of right now, I'm thinking probably won't do anything with it. Philip Morris, probably not a name you expected me to talk about. 3.25 is what's priced in on Philip Morris. Don't trade this very often, but this quarter seems interesting. So the options are only priced in about like a third of what it moved in July. So this is when it reported back in July. It moved like over 9 points, maybe a little bit over 9 points. So you had a really big move back in July, pricing in about just about like a third of that here. You have all of like the Altria like consolidation. They were going to combine drama. Then you have like the vaping headlines and all that drama. Increased volatility on the name over the past month. So I mean, there's gaps on the chart both directions. It had a big move last quarter. There's been expanded trading ranges on the name over the last month. So it just seems like it's set up for a bigger than priced in move either way. So straddle, strangle might be something to take a look at on Philip Morris. UMP, 7.25 was priced in. I talked about CSX before. Their report was definitely better than CSX's last quarter, but the stock is still off quite a bit. So again, kind of like CSX, I still feel like the options do leave some room from a pricing perspective. But UMP, maybe even more so than CSX, actually looks a little bit more vulnerable because it's below some really key support levels. But NSC could be a good sympathy trade. So if you're looking for some sort of sympathy candidate, NSC might be the way to go. And then last Thursday morning, you have Taiwan Semi. So this is the biggest chip stock from a market cap perspective. They're pricing in about 2.25. It's just been powering higher once it finally broke through 45, which has been a big level of resistance. Stock looks very, very extended right now, and and you wouldn't be able to tell, but they actually missed and guided lower last quarter, so it's pretty tough to be outright bullish. Semis, like I said before, definitely not my favorite names to trade, so I'm fairly certain I'm going to leave Taiwan Semi alone. But I mean, if it does pull back to 45, it could be an interesting candidate for like a buy, just because you can see how significant that 45 level has been over the last couple of years. All right. After the close Thursday, team. So software stock. 12.5 points. What's priced in? The software has definitely stopped its slide. The sector is up pretty nicely on Friday today, but I guess it's still been a overall pretty tough stretch for the group the last month and a half. I'll say that basically since like July, it's been very, very, very tough to get rewarded on the upside on these software stocks around their earnings, and teams options definitely are on the higher priced side, just based off what it typically moves. I feel like this is one that I'm interested in, but at the same time, it just seems like option pricing is going to kind of keep me away from it. So probably keep an eye on it, maybe after numbers, maybe right after numbers, see if there's like a quick trade, because it has had historically it's had some decent follow through after its numbers. So I'll keep an eye on it, but the option pricing just seems like a little too high for me. ISRG, 25 and a half points is what they're looking for. One of the more interesting setups. Options aren't the easiest to trade because the spreads are a little bit wider, volume's a little bit lower. But last quarter, it barely moved, and it's really not a super consistent name when it comes to earnings in terms of like its action. But at 25 and a half points, 26 points in that ballpark, it seems like they could be light, because if it gets through like 540, ton of space higher. If it gets through like 490, quite a bit of space lower. MedTech has been pretty volatile, right? So I mean, it seems like it would fall more in the speculative camp, but could be worth a shot. Maybe as like a low debit out of the money, like Strangle. And then E-Trade. So I mentioned this before, but E-Trade reports Thursday after close. 2.25 is what they're looking for. So Schwab earlier in the week might set the tone. So I'm not sure there's necessarily going to be a trade left on E-Trade once it actually gets around to reporting. But it does still have a really big gap above, and then it's quite a bit off the low from just a couple weeks ago. So expanding volatility, bigger day-to-day moves. So not my favorite name to trade, but this quarter was a little bit different just because of that recent headline, so maybe worth taking a look at. All right, wrapping it up, Friday before the open, AXP. So 420 in that ballpark is what they're looking for. Historically, really not a big mover on earnings, and the chart, I'll be honest, it really is not that compelling. Just kind of in like a downtrend off the high. It's a big name though, and it definitely could influence like a MasterCard or a Visa. And to me, like both of those actually look better, just from like a trading perspective, right? You can see MasterCard breaking through some resistance. So, to me, like either of those look better than AXP, but they don't always like respond to the AXP numbers. Coke. Let's go. There we go. Coke. So $1.70 is what they're pricing in. Not a name I normally trade. But Pepsi had a pretty good print just like last week or like a week and a half ago. So maybe Coke follows suit, right? Just off its high. So just retesting the high from the beginning of September. It's about like a 2.5, maybe even like a 3-point move, depending where it's at. So pricing in $1.70. If it's as good as Pepsi, maybe you can retest that high, which is above $1.70. So something to take a look at. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to be in it, but definitely a bigger name for Friday morning. And then last but not least, Schlumberger. So first big energy report. They're pricing in about $1.65. I mean, the stock desperately needs some good news. The sector desperately needs some good news. The price action has been brutal, hanging right around 2019 support. Had a fairly muted move in July on its earnings. So I'm a little bit more hesitant with it. I don't like the price action. I don't like the fact that it didn't really move last quarter. I still feel like energy is very washed out. Sentiment's horrible, and overall I feel like it's due for a bounce. But it's really kind of tough to be aggressive until the numbers come out and maybe some momentum builds again. So maybe if anything, look for like a calendar spread. Take advantage of like the higher implied volatility of like the near-term options in favor of some sort of longer-term position. All right. So as you can see, it goes from like super quiet on the earnings front to like super jam-packed, really like on the flip of a switch. So rest up, relax, get a game plan in place because it's going to be an absolutely crazy week. There's a ton of big names. And still have all these trade headlines swirling around, and that just adds fuel to the fire. So should be a busy one. All right. So questions or comments, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you guys. If you like these videos or if you want more information about options in play, definitely follow up with the link in the description of the video below. All right, you can get more trade ideas, more information about options to play. So definitely follow up on there. All right, have a wonderful night, and I'll talk to you guys on Monday.